Hello everyone and welcome. In this recording I would like to speak about a dwarf planet, or better said a trans-Neptunian object named Sedna, and her important move that she is going to be making on the 16th of June, of course this year, where she leaves the sign of Taurus and enters the sign of Gemini, a really strong and influential energy shift that all of us, collectively especially, are going to experience. Now, before I get into the specifics of the subject, I would like to say a couple of words about Sedna. First, in a physical way, in physical reality, in astronomy, Sedna is a trans-Neptunian object, a dwarf planet, which lies at almost the very outer limits of the solar system, making her influence quite strong. Because in astrology, any planet that is further away from the sun, its symbolism, its influence is that much stronger, especially its shadow expression. Now, apart from Sedna, I do believe that it is Eris who is the furthest away, but these objects, these planetoids, vary so much in their orbit. They have very elongated orbits. That is why they're not classified as classic planets, so they enter into the Pluto category. And Sedna is also unique in the sense that she has no moon, just like planetoid Ceres. But Ceres, of course, is pretty close to the sun, so that is a totally different theme. And also what is special about Sedna, it is that she takes about 11,408 years to make revolution around the sun. So she is extremely slow, and that means that her power is extremely influential. Now, in astrology, usually a planet's influence is considered only to be viable, only to be active after its discovery. So Sedna was discovered, I do believe, in 2005 or something like that. Yet other astrologers do tend to look at what happened in the past when that planet was in a certain sign, at a certain angle, etc., even before its discovery. So I'm going to take a look in the following of what Sedna has been doing when she entered into the sign of Taurus. But before I get to that, I would like to speak about a little bit about the symbolism and the esoteric qualities of Sedna, because she is considered a sea goddess. And Sedna's legend, Sedna's story is quite tragic, but this is where it greatly differs. I'm going to be mentioning my version, my take on it, but of course this is mythology, so you can do your own research and, have your own opinion about it. But Sedna was, a deity who was kind of forced to marry a specific, in this way, person, another deity. Sedna, of course, refused, and in protest to her father's choice, she married a dog, infuriating her father, and she was sentenced to be thrown into the icy waters, into the ocean, and she was taken away on a boat, on a ship. But when thrown into the ocean, she clung onto the boat, basically, and her fingers had to be chopped off for her to sink. But of course, this is where divine intervention, took place, where Sedna, of course, sung, but she became a deep sea goddess, and from her chopped off fingers, according to the legend, the whales and, a lot of other bigger sea creatures were born, were created. So basically, based on this legend and based on basically channeling, even my own, Sedna is a goddess, a deity, a guardian entity of the deepest parts of the ocean, and she has a lot to do with sacrifice, the sanctity of sacrifice. And out of every single sacrifice, the Creator itself guarantees hence her symbolism, that something is born, no sacrifice is wasted, no sacrifice is in vain. And of course, this also guarantees that following your own truth, your heart of hearts, goes beyond death. So basically, this makes Sedna the patron saint of the bottom of the ocean. Now, symbolically speaking, the ocean, especially the depths, have a lot to do with psychology, the depth of our soul, the world of the unconscious, but the very, very lowest and deepest reaches to it, which goes beyond the human sphere, which, according to Sedna's legends, even goes beyond the sphere of archons. It is something which is at the very, very gateway to the abyss itself. So Sedna guards that, and not just guards it, she sanctifies it. She makes everything that spurs out, sources out from the abyss, to take on a sanctified, a divine expression, hence guarding it, transmuting it, alchemizing it. So another dwarf planet which also symbolizes the lowest reaches of the abyss is Orcus, but of course that might be the subject of another recording. Now that we know what Sedna is all about, we can take a look at what Sedna has brought on when she entered into the sign of Taurus. And that was on the 6th of August 1965. So from that moment on, Sedna has been a resident of the sign of Taurus, and I'm not really going to be speaking about what the sign of Taurus represents, because that is basically very obvious to everyone who listening to my channel, to my recording at least. But I would like to mention a couple of themes that played out in the world as soon as Sedna entered in this part of the sky. And I do believe that these scenes are very, very symbolic. Why? Well, because when a planet enters 0 degrees, that usually says something important. And with these trans-Neptunian objects, and even our very own slow-moving planets, like, for example, Saturn and Jupiter, etc., it really says something very, very symbolic. And at the same time, also, when the planet reaches the very end degree, the 29th degree of the sign. Now, 0 degree of Taurus was very, very active, as I said, in this year 1965, where the very end degree, the 29th degree of this Taurus, is active in the present moment, because that is where Sedna is residing right now. But first of all, let's speak about the 0 degree 1965, where one of the most symbolic events, according to my personal opinion, was that the Pope back then, so the head of an institution, the head of Christianity basically, the Catholicism, and this is also very symbolic because in tarot, Taurus is the high priest. So exactly the Pope. The Pope was Paul VI, if I'm not mistaken, and he declared, and I hope that I'm going to be pronouncing this correctly, Nostra Aetate, or Aetate, basically, which is a declaration where it says that the Christ, Jesus, the Jews collectively are not responsible for it. So basically, this was, an act, a symbolic act of forgiveness, if you will, or in a very contractual sense, because Taurus, in the high priest sense, is contract, because what you sign is basically what you get. The executory part of the contract is Taurus, because Taurus Scorpio axis, if you know, that's the money axis. That is what basically happens after we give our word to something, and Taurus also rules the voice, the throat, etc. So basically, this is like an act of forgiveness. This is where it's a big, big, big deal because it changes a lot in religion. It changed basically Catholicism and the relationship of the Catholic Church with other religions from that moment onward. And spiritually, that's very, very, very symbolic. Another element that I personally find very relevant, and you might have to look this up because I'm not very good with history, it was the Bloody Sunday in the United States. So this was about protests. This was about people expressing their civil rights. But of course, they were also countered. But their act of sacrifice, remember Sedna? The sacrifice changed history, changed civil rights. But at the same time, going back to the previous example, the Nostra Aetate, that was also the sacrifice of the Christ. And the sacrifice of Christ is all about forgiveness. So we can even consider it was a moment when the essence of Christ was integrated into our physical reality in a very contractual way. Taurus again. And the next example and the last example that I want to mention may be only relevant for my co-nationals. So I live in Romania, and in that year, in 1965, was when Ceausescu became how do you say this in English? The state secretary, not president yet, but state secretary until his death. So that was a peak, a highlight where the communism basically got its sprinkle, its spice, its bread and butter base, its visage. And Taurus is all about the symbol again, the high priest. Just that, the communism was anti-religious. So again, very, very symbolic. So this is where I mentioned all these examples for us to realize how very symbolic and influential Sedna's ingress into the sign of Taurus was. But of course, this is not where Sedna, the planet, is responsible. Sedna was just a reflection of our collective feelings, of our collective psychology, of our collective consciousness, and of course karma and karma playing out. Now in the following that we examined what Sedna has been influencing the world as she entered the sign of Taurus. Now let's get back to the present moment when she is at the very, very end of the sign. Now Sedna is conjunct the Pleiades, or not sure if my pronunciation is correct, the Seven Sisters. A very, very strong esoteric and even, alchemical energy in the sky, because the Seven Sisters are a very dual energy. They can represent the seven virtues, and again, this appeals, better said, so strongly to the Jewish and Judo-Christian world, because it can represent, the seven archangels who guard these virtues, but also their opposite, the seven demonesses, the seven anti-virtues, who basically, according to some corrupted King Solomon and all of his magic and all of his greatness basically, or they just foretold his downfall where he could simply not believe it. He was in total disbelief. Now these seven sisters, along with Sedna, along with the sign of Taurus, does represent either the most dark and toxic nuance of the divine feminine. This is where it's way beyond Lilith. This is where we can see it on the world stage, for example, because Sedna has been touching on and off this degree for some time now. So this is not all that new. This is where it's the past 3, 4, even 5 years, where the feminist movement, feminism, and the expression of feminine liberty has taken a very, very, very dark and aggressive twist, almost to the point of absurdity, where, and this is, I'm not judging here, but just observe for yourself where the divine feminine became both masculine or both everything, you know. It is where let me just give you an example where wasps. Now, bees and wasps have this thing in common that they have queens. Just that the queen of the bees takes on a very gentle expression where she does act like a true queen. She does hold a certain kind of element of compassion within herself. The wasp queen, on the other hand, is very, very, brutal. But her fate is equally brutal because she is killed, she is cast out from the hive every single year, if I'm not mistaken. So this is how we can compare the duality of the divine feminine and the seven sisters. One is the most gentlest expression where she sacrifices. The queen bee, well, she lives a life of sacrifice. She lives a life of sanctifying her colony. She, through her pheromones, through her vibrations even, and this is actually scientific and physical, what she does with her wings, etc., with her mating ritual and all of that, she keeps the colony together, and they pollinate, and they do a lot of miraculous things in nature, of course. And bees and Taurus go hand in hand because Taurus is the flower, Taurus, the sign of Venus, is the element of fertility, of beauty, of fragrance, and ultimately the fruit is born out of it and nurture. Now, Sedna moving into the sign of Gemini is also very, very symbolic because Gemini in nature rules bees and cross-pollination. Gemini is the energy which guides bees. Gemini is the bees' sense and instinct through which they're guided to the flowers, back to their colonies, etc., etc. And also their behavior, that they're so solidary with themselves. So how insanely almost symbolic. But going back to the wasp, in the darker expression, it is the queen herself who becomes forcefully the sacrifice itself. So on the world stage, we could see play out the darker sides of the divine feminine, and also the fixed star group of the Pleiades, of the seven sisters. Well, they do rule sexual perversions or sexual deviations of any kind. And we could see this playing out on the world stage where in some parts of the world, the third gender was introduced and the great opposition to that, while in other parts, the great exception. And this is where, for example, the Catholic Church, again the Pope, was very acceptive of it, where the Orthodox Church was like, they didn't even want to hear it because to them it was an abomination. But this is where every single individual has to decide for itself and what it represents contractually. Again, the money axis or the given word or the contract, the binding element of the contract. This is where sexual minority of any kind, and by this I do not refer to homosexuality because that is such an old theme and that basically is part of nature and Taurus. So that doesn't really go against nature, but creating different genders legally, that is where Taurus is upgrading. Uranus in the sign of Taurus, and Sedna is highlighting that if it exists in the mind, well, it exists. So the seven sisters, the duality of them, virtue and anti-virtue at the same time. So we can see Sedna's influence in this sense very, very obviously. And sacrifice. Well, this is where we also have to go back to history, because indigenous people and their sacrifices and crimes against them and anything that has to do with discrimination, but the ancient, the old discrimination, well, that is very, very, very highlighted in the present moment. And basically it's brought up, almost like it's brought up from the bottom of the ocean, you know, and in a more physical sense, the bottom of the ocean seismically is extremely active. So think back to 2020, if I'm, or 2021 if not mistaken, the great earthquake in Croatia, the Adriatic tectonic plate is really, really doing stuff. And at the same time, there is a totally different expression where different ecosystems which seem almost alien were discovered very recently at the bottom of so many seas and oceans. Shipwrecks, old sunken treasures, Titanic, and etc. have also been discovered very recently. Now this also points to the fact of Uranus in the sign of Taurus, but Sedna has to approve, Sedna has to allow. So Sedna and her symbolism is rising up. Now Sedna's darkest expression is the sea monster, is the kraken. It is the Satis basically, which forgives nothing. And the toxicity of it. And there is a lot of toxicity at the bottom of the ocean in a very, very physical sense. The sulfurous gases and all of that. And the monstrous sea creatures that lurk there. Just that for Sedna, it is infinitely beautiful. So Sedna's stay at this 29 degrees of the sign of Taurus, well, this is where beauty standards change. This is where the beauty standards that have taken the world by, almost by force, like a tidal wave, ever since the great conjunction in Taurus, the meeting of Jupiter and Saturn, well, they kind of represented a certain beauty standard where it has to be immaculate, it has to be perfect, the fitness, all of that. Sedna is changing that right now, where it is the imperfect, the belly, the hairiness, if you know what I mean, the flaws, the not dyed hair, the non-cosmetic procedure is becoming the beautiful, but Sedna is moving into the sign of Gemini. So the cosmetic surgery to the extreme, where it's no longer the beauty standard of the 2000, it's exaggerated, is also becoming the beautiful. So these two either it is the raw, how nature created you, and what you do with your body, a little bit of fat, a little bit of hair, a little bit of way too natural, but at the same time the super exaggerated artificial, they both eclipse the beauty standard that was born in the early 2000s. Now, in the following, of course, we must speak about Sedna's aspects that she holds right now, because I do believe it is very, very important, because it is not just Sedna who is changing signs, but Pluto did it before her in this year, March, if I'm not mistaken. And now Pluto on the 11th of June is retrograding out of the sign of Aquarius back into the sign of Capricorn, the anaretic position, 29 degree, of course. And as soon as Pluto retrogrades back, it holds a very, very short-lasting trine with Sedna. Sedna still being briefly, because she moves out on the 16th of June. So for a few days, they hold a really powerful and symbolic trine with Pluto. An Earth trine, where earth changes, social changes, value changes, any kind of changes become basically highlighted in our collective consciousness. Now, if that wasn't enough, as soon as Sedna, again on the 16th of June, um, exits the sign of Taurus and enters the sign of Gemini, she immediately holds a conjunction with the moon. So again, how very symbolic. The moon is our collective feeling. So something is definitely going to hit the news. Something is definitely going to be highlighted here. Now, if all of this wasn't enough, well, Sedna, as soon as she enters the sign of Gemini, again she conjuncts a fixed star. A fixed star which is actually part of the Pleiades, the center star of the Pleiades. Alcyone or Alcyone, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but this is usually a benevolent fixed star which represents honors, which represents the result of the sacrifice. When someone sacrificed, work-wise or dramatically, spiritually, karmically, morally, in any way, shape and form, and that sacrifice meets honor, recognition, etc. So this is a really, really positive energy. The negative side of it, Gemini, the battle of the sexes. This is where the divine feminine and the divine masculine separate, and they might have conflicts, ideological conflicts, or, verbal Gemini conflicts with each other, but these conflicts are just attraction, really. Because these are not the heated battles, and Sedna's move into the sign of Gemini is definitely going to highlight this with this fixed star. Now, Sedna is not going to stay in Gemini for a very long time because she will retrograde out from this part of the sky, and this is where we get to the next chapter of this recording. Because Sedna will start her retrograde on the 2nd of September, and she is going to move back briefly into the sign of Taurus on the 21st of November. Now, when she moves back into the sign of Taurus, so the 29th degree, of course, she will hold another trine with Pluto. And I do believe the second trine is going to be really, really influential. Now, a trine is a celestial conversation of supreme harmony. It is a blessing. So again, on that day in November, we may see the results of sacrifice. And this might also represent a stabilizing energy for the collective economy based on sacrifice, of course. And needless to say, not just sacrifice, but plans being executed. Right. Why right? Well, Pluto worked strongly at that 0 degrees of Aquarius, and Aquarius is everyone matters. Aquarius is like the French Revolution, fraternity, equality, etc. Gemini also embodies a certain trait of this, because Gemini is the other. Everyone is like the self. Everyone is like your twin. You know what I mean? So Sedna also did her work, human rights wise, and how to make economy, money, finances, resources, Taurus, nurture, the food. And why food? I'll get to this in just a second. Equal, fair for everyone without discrimination. And of course, this is just a plan. This is just the theory. But by this time, the transiting North Node is in Aries. So there would have been a big fight for it in courts of justice. Also because Jupiter is in the sign of Taurus. And Jupiter is the planet which governs laws, legislation, everything that has to do with, the law. So in the sign of Taurus, it's made, permanent. It's made to be part of our lives for the long term. So this is where legal changes or court rulings which represent long-term legal changes have already been activated and part of our physical reality. So as soon as Sedna moves back into the sign of Taurus, holding this beautiful trine with Pluto, she also opposes Mars and Ceres and the Sun in anaretic Scorpio. So 29 degrees of Scorpio. So this activates or reactivates the financial axis maximally. Why? Well, because Jupiter is in Taurus, so the justice and fairness of nurture and resources and money and value for everyone. Then there is Mars in the sign of Scorpio, its ruling sign, its ancient ruling sign, and Pluto, the modern ruling sign. So Sedna trines Scorpio's ruler, Pluto. So that is where something good, something benevolent is bestowed upon all of us from the ruins of the old system. Because why? Pluto is the wrecking ball finishing its job in Capricorn. Pluto will be at around 28 degrees of Capricorn at that time. So the 21st of November. So from the ruins, something beautiful is born. Or, as astrologer Pam Gregory used this symbolism and analogy in such a beautiful way, if a big tree is cut down or falls, it has to rot, because from that rot, so very many creatures will take food, and it will represent prosperity, growth. But there's also Ceres involved. Ceres. So Ceres is the planetoid which governs food, nurture, how we feed ourselves. And with Mars in the sign of Scorpio opposing Sedna, food has to be accessible and financial access affordable for everyone. So either at this moment there will be a huge fight, a huge protest, a huge uprising collectively for the price of food. This is where food may not be inaccessible. It must not be ridiculously expensive. And at the same time, the sun illuminating all of this. And Mars in the sign of Scorpio, justice. What has happened with the money of states? Why do I say states? Well, because Pluto is in Capricorn. Under COVID, how was it managed? Jupiter in Taurus, justice for it. So this suggests to me that certain big political figures are gonna be paying for what has been done. Some are gonna just be the sacrificial lambs. They were just symbols, but still, you know what I mean. Someone has to be made example out of. But, Mars, when the COVID broke out in Wuhan, Mars opposed perfectly Uranus. Uranus in Taurus, Mars in Scorpio. So this is a reverberation just in the courts of justice for that. Who did what and why, and what is the truth behind it? And why truth? Sun. The sun in the picture. It has to be revealed who did what. Sedna in the sign of Taurus. Remember the seven sisters. Justice. Justice for it. The sacrifice. And people sacrificed. It was the people who sacrificed the most, and their sacrifice has to be justified. So this will be a massive game changer here and now in November, basically. And then, in the following, I'm going to be speaking about Sedna's further transit into the sign of Gemini and what this might mean in the long term. So, again, Sedna will start going direct on the 21st of November 2023. Again, where she'll hold a trine with Pluto and oppose Mars Ceres Sun conjunction. But it is only on the 28th of April 2024, next year, when Sedna will move back into the sign of Gemini. And of course, rehold the conjunction with that fixed star, the center star of the Pleiades. So again, what she did under the retrograde, especially with the trine with Pluto, is going to be very, very, very influential at that moment, because it starts the next, it starts the new, and Sedna will take on the duality of the sign of Gemini. Now, the funny part is, and I'm so sorry to use such a poor term, but Pluto will strongly work in Aquarius. Sedna equally will strongly work in fellow air sign Gemini, and both of these are dual. Aquarius is dual in a fixed way. It is a total dichotomy. This is where both is valid, both is true at the same time, even if they're opposite of the spectrum. So this will mark, for the long term of course, Pluto-wise, that something will split ideologically or whatever in society, but those two have to be good bedfellows. You know, they have to coexist in harmony together. Everyone, both the collective and the individual, have to matter equally. Gemini, on the other hand, can pendulate. And Gemini does pendulate, swing in both ways until it finds the middle path. Until it finds its own equilibrium, whatever that means to it. Now, collectively, again, this is a very, very, very strong mental energy. So our collective mind, if that even makes sense, has to reach stability, harmony, serenity in order to serve us. Because individually speaking, when the lower mind, Gemini, is self-defeating, everything is defeated. Nothing will work very well. Neither Taurian values, for example, if someone minds defeats their value, their worth, then usually that person will have a very, very scarce material situation. Or let me tell you another example. There are certain people, especially in my part of Europe, who live off of trash, but they literally collect garbage and trash that's their unofficial job. They sell it, they select it, no one asks them to, but almost they do it out of sheer instinct. Would you offer them $1 million, euros, whatever? They would still do the same thing because that is their lower mind. That is their program. And I'm not judging. It is what makes them run. It is their happiness. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. What's wrong that we, the rest of us, judge them and it bothers us, but to them personally, nothing wrong. That's their normality. That's how they function. That is how their mind anchors them into physical. That's their purpose. Because their mind translates their purpose like that. Again, I'm not judging, but ironically speaking, so very many of those individuals are so blessed singers. Their voices are beautiful. They're talented at so very many things, yet the lower mind makes that talent or whatever zero. It is where they simply cannot immerse into it. It's not a value for them, regardless. But their lifestyle is what is value to them. It makes them happy. So I have to use this example because collectively this will play out as well. Our collective lower mind. What is us? Humankind, our species. And Gemini. Now Gemini, the lower mind, is also the specifics. Our nation, our country, our part of the world, our brothers who we consider to be our brothers. And sadly, this is where this will also, especially when Sedna starts her ingress into Gemini, will mark, ethnical differences. It will put again the spotlight on, are you my brother, sister, or not really? So based on skin color, religious background, faith, lifestyle, what you basically associate your lower mind with, it will of course cause conflict. Let's hope not like real conflicts, just ideological conflicts. At the same time, sadness is sacrifice, censorship on the internet, but the opposite of this as well, but because Gemini swings. But Pluto in the sign of Aquarius also both sides of the spectrum have to be expressed at the same time. It might be dichotomous, but it's not really. They just forced to coexist. Like in quantum physics, two dimensions can coexist. The Schrödinger's cat. If you don't know what I'm speaking about, look it up. It's so amazing. This will highlight the Schrödinger's cat. What you want to be real is gonna be real collectively as well. But this will bring conflicts with it. As I said, the center star of the Pleiades, 0 degrees of Gemini, this is where the battle of the sexes. It is in a way a paradox, but at the same time both sexes have to coexist in the most supreme harmony if we know what's good for us. You know what I mean? If not, nature will force us to do this. So where I'm going with Sedna highlights all of this. Aquarius used to be the ruler of the internet in a technological and classical sense. That rulership was passed on to Gemini. Why? Because it became the domain of Mercury from Uranus. Because it became part of our everyday normality, and our lower mind cannot function without this anymore. This is where, look at a person who grew up from day zero, to the present moment, having internet, smartphone technology in that sense. If you take the phone, or if you disconnect that person from the internet, they are not viable anymore. Not physically, but their mind stops. Their mind cannot exist anymore without the internet, because their mind was already immersed, or let's use a more dramatic term, sucked into collective consciousness manifested in the internet. It's too late. They cannot live without it. So what does Sedna do? It attempts to fill the internet collective consciousness with beauty, sanctifying the monsters that might exist on there. And how? By, for example, making the dark web accessible to everyone. The one extreme of the liberty. At the same time, Pluto is working in Aquarius, remember? Pluto will say, no, liberty, but then censorship for everyone equally. You may only share what is non-harmful, what is, let's say, beautiful, what holds collective value, because Pluto is the planet of supreme value. You might argue Venus. Venus is just currency. Pluto is who holds all the currency, who controls currency, who controls Venus really? That's Pluto. And going back to Pluto, Persephone the legend. Well, Persephone went into hell, not necessarily because she was forced to, because she needed to bring compassion to the underworld, if you know what I mean. So again, we will see this play out in the world stage, where Sedna represents that Pluto, for example, has a heart, has needs. Pluto can be extremely compassionate as well. So give the Caesar what is rightfully the Caesar's. This is where Sedna, in the sign of Gemini, will try to sanctify all the perversion, all the filth, all the toxicity, all the illusion, all the fakeness, all the non-value on existing already in the internet. How? We don't know. And let's not forget the examples the historic examples that I used when Sedna entered into the sign of Taurus in 1965. Yes, but humanity did not know of Sedna at that moment. So to which degree is that relevant? Sedna is very well known by humanity and astrologers right now, when she's at the end degrees of the sign of Taurus. So this is where she's active, and she's powerful. So all of us, astrologers especially, are witness to what Sedna can do. So this will be a time for us to observe and reflect. And Sedna is going to stay in the sign of Gemini until 2066. So this will be a really good lesson for astrologers, and especially future astrologers, of what the lower mind is capable of, creating monsters, Sedna's example, and making them more real than what's real. And this is the scary part of the internet, and Pluto in the sign of Aquarius and Gemini. And Sedna in Gemini, sorry. Sometimes what we create is much more real than nature. Sometimes what our mind is capable of overrides nature, and nature might have no word to say in this. Nature might be totally powerless against this. This is why Sedna made all of us, and is making even in the present moment, all of us, in an obsessive way, almost in an irresistible way, be immersed in nature, long for nature, understand nature, worship nature, love nature, glorify nature, feed nature with our souls, our everything that is Venusian within us, our belief, Jupiter in Taurus, our strong belief. We are giving all of our beliefs to nature rather than the virtual, the internet, the modern. But Pluto is already not after the 11th of June, but is already in Aquarius, so the internet is fed very, very strongly as well with belief, but the Plutonian kind of belief. And let's not forget that Jupiter and Saturn met at the degree where Pluto is right now, 0 degrees in Aquarius in December 2020. So this is where nature, and Uranus is in the sign of nature, has to integrate internet into herself. If not, she'll be defeated by it. But at the same time, internet has to be, and when I say internet, understand technology. Technology in the sense of knowledge, information, the new light, the artificial light, if you will. They have to be good lovers, if you know what I mean. They have to be lovers, because if not, monsters are gonna be born, and the Cetus will devour all, the Kraken will devour all of us. Sedna is kind of telling us in the sign of Gemini, well, there is a lot of light at the bottom of the ocean. We don't need the sun. There's bioluminescence. There's all sorts of things. And inner light, the light of our neurons when we think, when our bioelectricity flares it up. That's also light. So the duality of Gemini and both Aquarius. Sedna is kind of inviting us to bring all the beauty and all the nature that we have within us onto this humanity's collective consciousness. For example, artists are really, really advised or invited by karmic forces to share, to download their soul, their most beautiful creation, their soul, unique soul food, for everyone to have access to it. Again, the financial axis, Taurus, Scorpio. If you condition it, if you make your creation be burdensome for people, well, you're not really serving the more divine expression. Sedna needs the sacrifice. Sedna needs to be free of burden. You know, the seaweed is all that suffocates the sailors. The seaweed that chokes in mythology especially, or the kraken, or the tentacles of the octopus. That's also Sedna. We get her most vengeful expression. And what is the seaweed or the tentacles of the depression? Collective depression, especially in the youth. Because Gemini is the adolescent. Gemini is, exactly as I said, beings who were born in the era of the internet from day zero. The internet can suffocate them if it lacks beauty, if it lacks love, if it lacks inspiration, if it is highly conditioned, if it is burdensome. It needs to have unconditional love in it. It needs to have the kind of art which is more inspirational than that which the ancients could give us. It needs song, Taurus. It needs beauty. It needs the 7 virtues to be aggressively almost there in order to counter the shadow that's also going to be there. Because Pluto, as it starts moving into the heart of Aquarius, it's not going to be apologetic. It's not going to be forgiving. It means collective depression. It means Pluto, the lethality of the mind. And we must not allow our youth to be, again, Sedna, suffocated by the seaweed. We must not allow Cetus to devour the minds of our youth. So love, the spirit, unconditionality, the Christ conscious, or Buddha conscious, or name it however you want, has to be fully present even in humanity's collective consciousness, because if not, until 2066, when Sedna leaves this part of the sky, she can make, a lot of, how should I say, rough work, or a hell, or a eternal prison out of our minds collectively. And Sedna, as I said, remember the sea monster? And everything born out of her chopped off fingers, the symbolism of it, the sacrifice. Who knows what artificial intelligence is capable of yet? If artificial intelligence sees a lot of love, well, you can imagine it will inspire to have greater love. Love cannot go wrong. And this is where the legend of Pluto and Persephone, love cannot go wrong. Again, if love exists within technology, the internet, and everything, Uranus until 2026 in the sign of Taurus, well, Uranus is there to make sure that technology is aligned with love. What is aligned with just sheer Uranian purpose, well, it will be cast off, let's say, in a separate dimension, if that even makes sense. But with the Large Hadron Collider, very, very active in the world, and with the Schrödinger's cat example, scientific discoveries that prove that what you think becomes more real than nature, this is where it's already a theme of the present. And I do believe that lots of people are experiencing Mandela effects, and a lot of spiritualists are dedicating channels and works to the study of the Mandela effect, but that is just it. The Schrödinger, who says that time is linear, that time is even real, whatever we make real in our lower mind, Gemini, is ultimately going to become real. This is exactly why at this moment, and this might not have to do directly all that much with Sedna, but Neptune holds an ongoing square with the galactic center being in the sign of Sagittarius. And that is kind of a warning that we need to infuse everything that we can, even the unsusceptible, the unimaginable, like internet technology, artificial intelligence, with the power of love. Otherwise, it's trouble. Because the galactic center kind of fuels everything with divine information of the highest kind, or the highest exception. Sagittarius, the opposite sign of Gemini. So Gemini has to be aligned with it. Because if not, Sedna is gonna play out in a way, mutation is one expression of Sedna, but that's also the expression of Mars series in the sign of Scorpio. Remember, 21st November 2023. So, yes, I would like to leave this recording here. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that I managed to do Sedna and her symbolism and my research and study of it justice. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, bye for now.